For abortion rights supporters, there's no place like Kansas. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. This week we got our first look at the direct electoral politics of abortion after the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. Kansas voters decided a proposal to remove the state's constitutional protection of abortion rights. The answer was a resounding no. The proposed amendment lost 59% to 31%. Abortion rights easily prevailed in a red state that Donald Trump won by double digits. The margin of victory surprised nearly everyone, and it has caused activists on both sides to wonder what would happen if such a vote were held in other states like Ohio. Jesse Balmert, how are activists on either side viewing what happened in Kansas, the ones here in Ohio?
Well, I think if you support abortion access in Ohio, which has been greatly restricted since the Dobbs decision, Ohio currently prevents doctors from performing abortion after fetal activity is detected, so about 6 weeks into pregnancy. If you support more access to abortion than that, this is a cause for some optimism. Obviously, Kansas is a more conservative, more red state. Traditionally, they've picked Republicans 19 of the last 20 presidential elections. So there's some, reason to feel good about what happened in Kansas that could happen in Ohio. One of the challenges is Ohio won't have the opportunity to vote on a constitutional amendment on abortion access until at least 2023, and we're not quite sure what that language is going to look like yet.
Andrew, but it woke everybody up. It's on the ballot. It was clearly a yes or no on abortion rights in a red state, and abortion rights won handily. That has to help the folks who want to get this on the ballot, and it has to worry folks for the midterms. Yeah,
I do think that another aspect of it too is that it's a yes or a no, and it's easier to get people to vote no on something. But on the other hand, people who want to explain it away, I think people understand abortion. They know what it is. They understand it. It's not complicated, really, and it's something that people have strong opinions on. So there are nuances, like Jesse said, if it is on the ballot. What exactly are you proposing? People hold nuanced views on this subject in general, which makes public sentiment really hard to track. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, but certainly, as we keep saying, Kansas is further to the right than Ohio, and there's no reason to believe something like that couldn't happen here. Mike,
were you surprised by the margin? The polls before this vote was basically 50-50, 47% to 47%, in the past couple of years in Kansas on the issue of abortion, and this was 60-40.
Well, I was very surprised by it. Very surprised by it. I don't think I would have stunned, had it been the same result, but I would have guessed somewhere in the vicinity of, 52-48, that type of thing, either way. So this was a real shock to me.
Herb, does it make abortion a more sort of a bellwether issue for the midterms, or is this a one-off?
No, it's not a one-off. I think the Republicans in some states are making abortion more of an issue for the Democrats, because I think in Ohio now we're talking about the heartbeat bill, but I think we're also saying, well, no, we're going to go beyond that. We're going to have perhaps a conception or a personhood bill, and that's even more extreme. And so I'm not sure that the people who are proposing that kind of measure in Ohio really took any lesson from Kansas. And I think they'll actually then further energize the pro-choice people. But look, there is a consensus. There are a lot of nuanced views about abortion, but look, most Americans do not support anytime, anyhow abortion. They don't believe in that. And they certainly don't believe in, no conception or the conception version of abortion. They don't believe in the personhood. They think there should be reasonable exceptions. And I think what's happening in Ohio right now is that, the ardent, pro-life people are defining the issue in such a way that it's going to seem very, very extreme. When in fact, I think more people are saying, yeah, there should probably be abortion rights, but with limitations.
Jesse, there's Nan Whaley, strong supporter of abortion rights, obviously a woman running against a man who is very much opposed to abortion rights, even though he's taking a low profile right now on the issue. Does she try to capitalize on this? Does it energize her campaign on this issue? Does she just focus on this issue now?
Certainly, she's going to try to capitalize on this. It's a topic that she's talked about repeatedly since the Dobbs decision came out. Mike DeWine, in contrast, has talked very little about his position on abortion, which has been one of, if not his most consistent policy position across, several decades of politics. He has, really signed abortion ban after abortion restrictions. So if you ask people at Ohio Right to Life, he is one of their greatest champions, but that's not a position that he's currently focusing on. Is that just, it's the general election and he'd rather talk about intel or something else? That's possible.
Andrew, how does this play out? Do we get on the ballot in 23 because of what we saw in Kansas? Is it a big effect in this election, 2024's election?
Yeah, I'll say kind of, a colleague of mine has done more reporting on this. My sense is that I don't think there's consensus about what they want to do exactly. I don't necessarily get the sense also that the campaign, as it were, is very organized. So I think there's going to be a very difficult question for them if they want to do it in 2023. There are pros and cons to doing that, but if that's the case, then they would have to get something together rather quickly. Maybe they'd want to capture on the energy, for instance. If they do have to wait until 2024, whether it's to get resources or get an idea of what the campaign looks like or what the issue looks like, then you're talking about the presidential election. Maybe that changes, people's issue set. Maybe waiting a little longer, the issue fades a little bit. So it's kind of hard to predict, but I guess we'll just have to kind of see how things coalesce.
It is a whole new world, Mike, because this was put on the ballot. The effort started in 2019 when the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that the Kansas Constitution protected abortion. Republicans wanted to get it on the ballot. The legislature did that. They chose August because it would be a low turnout election. They could get it passed. Well, it was a huge turnout election. So it's really it's a whole new game now.
It is a whole new game, and I think you're probably going to see something similar to that in 23 on the ballot. But it's different than Kansas. As Andrew said, Kansas was a yes or no. You put something on the ballot here, it's got to say something. If you just say, let's have abortion wide open, it's not going to pass. And once you pick out a time frame or something, then you get a lot of talk, and whatever that's going to be, it's not going to be 61, 31, or whatever your numbers were.
So that's the question for abortion rights supporters. If they do put it on the ballot, what's the week number?
What's the content?
What's the week? Is it 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, viability? All abortion is legal?
Somewhere between 12 and 15 weeks.
Can those folks come to that agreement on the left side?
They will have to out of necessity. Otherwise, they're doomed in terms of either not getting on the ballot or suffering defeat. So they're going to have to tell their supporters who want, let's say, a more open abortion policy, that's not going to fly. That won't pass. And I think they'll find polling data and they'll find other experiences that say somewhere in the first trimester, give or take a week or whatever, and then maybe have a provision in there also that says if the mother is suffering from serious health consequences while pregnant beyond 15 weeks, then in fact there can be an exception there. But it will have to be worded very carefully. But the other thing that's happened here now in Ohio, and I know when I was on with Mike Anadakis some weeks ago, he said, well, we'll actually protect the health of the mother, or the life of the mother. And life and health aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
And but we're absolutely opposed to any exemptions for rape and incest. And most people hear that, not everybody, and say, well, that's just absurd. And then, of course, we had the issue of the young woman from Ohio who went to Indiana. And the issue isn't whether she could have had the abortion here in Ohio. The issue is, why would you force her to carry the baby to term?
Yeah, that's what the Indiana legislature is still struggling with, and that's a pretty red state as well. Our next topic, on Tuesday, Ohio held the delayed second half of its primary election. It was for state legislative races. Very few people cast ballots. Turnout failed to reach 8%, a record low, easily a record low. 632,000 people cast ballots in Ohio, with the cost of the election estimated at $25 million. That came out to $39 per vote. When it was over, there were a few surprises in this redistricting chaos primary. Andrew Tobias, what can we, if anything, read from this primary?
Well, the first thing that I really want to emphasize is that, and yes, it's not like the other primaries we've had in the past, but it was by far the lowest turnout. Going back to 1962, Ohio's always had at least 1 million people show up to vote for primary elections in even years. the number was something like 631,000. So it was just, and that's dating back to 1960 when the population was 4 million people less. So that being said, it's hard to really take anything too seriously away from it, just because a low turnout election creates unpredictable outcomes. And I will say, three incumbents who were defeated. One, you had two Democrats who were basically drawn in the same district. And then you had an incumbent who was just appointed earlier this year who wasn't really established. And then you had somebody else who ran a very bitter primary and almost lost 2 years ago. So you didn't really have any, well-established people knocked off, surprisingly. You did have some incumbents lose. So, it was not, all said and told, it wasn't really that exciting of an election, I guess, from my standpoint. So.
I heard today, Mike, that some folks on Capitol Square were actually surprised how high the turnout was. They thought it was going to be even lower.
Well, Mike, I'm one of those 600 and some thousand people who did vote, and I'm not sure why. I got there, and there was a little sticker in front of me as I was signing in, says, in the race of A versus B, B dropped out. So if you vote for him, it doesn't count. Okay, so then I go in, and I think that counting A versus B, there was either 2 or at the most 3 contested races. And once you took A out, that left either 2 contested races or 1 on my ballot. So, I could have saved everybody $39, I guess, had I not gone.
It would have cost more if you didn't vote.
That's true.
Herb, this is an unusual year because of the redistricting. Did it hurt democracy that we had so little participation, both as far as candidates and voters in this primary?
Most people forgot about the primary before the primary, and they'll forget about this primary after it. I think some of the significant results, which I'm not really that familiar with, really happened in the Republican State Central Committee, where in fact there was some major gains in Licking and Delaware County and elsewhere by not just the conservative or the very conservative, but the extreme wing of the party. And I don't know how those numbers add up. And of course, this would have been an even lower turnout. I don't know how many votes it would have taken to have won. But so people are, and of course, we talked about Betty Montgomery before we went on there.
And she lost her Central Committee seat.
And
well-known Republican.
And she really, she really didn't campaign. And in fact, some of her friends were urging her not to run. Why do you still want to be involved in this mess? Because it really is kind of bitter on the State Central Committee.
Jesse, there was some fear that more Republican incumbents might lose in the primary, but there were only just a couple.
Yeah, I think Andrew summed it up well. There were a few instances, particularly like the Licking County race. There was a decent amount of money spent by former Speaker Larry Householder in that race, the last round, that helped the person who ultimately won. And then there was the revenge of the other primary candidate there. It is worth noting there are at least 2 Democratic candidates in the Columbus area who might be representing Somali Americans for the first time. So perhaps when you have like a lower turnout, slightly confusing primary, you get more representation for people who are organized.
Yeah, organization was the key, especially a lot of people thought they had already voted in the primary. So why do we have to vote again? We voted in May. Anyway, J.D. Vance has surfaced. He is back campaigning. He was at the state fair this week. And he has a new TV ad out, his first in months, a time where he basically yielded the TV ad field to his opponent, Tim Ryan. Since we have played several of Ryan's ads on this show, here is Vance's first post-primary spot.
Our family story is an Ohio story. My husband, JD, grew up in Middletown, and things weren't easy. His mom struggled with addiction, and his dad wasn't there. But JD was lucky. He was raised by his loving grandmother, and he served his country as a Marine in Iraq. He's an incredible father, and he's my best friend. JD shared his family story in Hillbilly Elegy, and he wants for Ohio what Ohio gave him, a fighting chance.
I'm JD Vance, and I approve this message.
One note, the ad was paid for by the National Republican Senatorial Committee, not Vance's campaign, which has struggled to raise money. Herb Asher, the ad accomplishes 2 things. It counters the message. He's from San Francisco. J.D. Vance is from San Francisco. And his wife, I'm guessing, is talking to suburban Republican women.
Yes, yeah, it's a classic intro ad, the bio ad. It's a very, very positive, it's a very nice ad. The ads will change quite dramatically within a couple of weeks, and the ads will. But first, you have to identify yourself as sort of a good guy and a good person. But eventually it'll be, he'll try to make this a referendum on Democrats and Joe Biden, and therefore Tim Ryan is guilty of every sin that any Democrat ever committed or whatever. And he'll be talking about how, the drugs in Ohio come from Mexico because the Democrats allow the border to be just a total mess and inflation and all of that. So Vance will want to make this sort of a referendum on the Democratic Party, and then tie in Tim Ryan with that. Ryan will want to make the issue a choice between J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan. And so you're going to see that, and that's what really, Ryan got off to a very good start. I mean, he was defining himself and defining J.D. Vance, and I think he's done a good job in that area.
Andrew, there was a wide gap between the end of the primary when we saw a lot of J.D. Vance's ads, both attacking him and supporting him. And he took some criticism for staying off the air for a long time. When that ad popped up, I was like, oh, okay, that was good. Is that the reason why he stayed off? Maybe to let that old negative stuff that, Jane Timken and Mike Gibbons were throwing at him back in the day, back in May, April, settle?
That's kind of a question that a lot of people had, especially nationally. Republicans are looking at a Senate map where they don't want to defend a seat in Ohio that Rob Portman is giving up. They'd rather focus on picking up Democratic seats in other states. And so I think that people assumed that Vance was fundraising when post-primary. But then when his campaign finance report came out, and I believe it was late June or early July, he only had a couple $1 million. So Tim Ryan's, had at that point spent something like $6 million and still had another $4 million left or something like that. And so it just caused a lot of concern. I mean, if you talk to Vance's allies, they basically said that, elections aren't won in the summer. People aren't really paying attention. We're able to more effectively spend our resources in September and onward. But I will say, too, in addition to the ad that we just saw that the Senate Republican Committee paid for, a nonprofit that's associated closely with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has also indicated, I think it's about $3 million that they're going to be spending on ads here. So that's going to be happening this month. So I think that's moving up the schedule. And, I think it's showing that Republicans might have some concern.
Are Republicans glad to see J.D. Vance out there more visible now?
Oh, I think so. I don't think any Republican is probably really happy with what he's done, which is basically nothing. But it'll come, and he's going to have the money, and it'll be a very interesting contested races. I think Herb's exactly right. That's what's going to happen. But any Republican, according to the polls and so forth, who doesn't argue inflation and the cost of everything and the drugs coming, whatever. I mean, it's not limited to Vance in his Senate race. It's going to be all over the country. Whether that's fair or not, I guess you take your money and make your choice. But that's what's going to happen.
Jesse, a lot of eyes will be on the next campaign finance report. I'm not sure if it'll even, when it comes out, if it'll even before the election, but he's going to raise more money than he has. Even in the primary, he didn't raise that much money. He got it from Peter Thiel. J.D. Vance. Yeah.
It's nice to have friends in high places, I imagine. Tim Ryan is also in a spot where he needs to convince national Democrats that Ohio is a place where they should be spending money. And so he has done a lot of advertising, has done a lot of, defining his opponent in an effort to, convince people that Ohio is a place where Democrats can win and that this could be a pickup. So, that was time that we'll find out if that was well spent.
And I think he succeeded at that. So I think Vance really made the mistake here by being silent for so long. Remember months ago, everybody assumed the Republicans would hold on to the seat. Donald Trump carried Ohio twice by 8%, and the Republicans control everything in the state. So I don't think they really thought there was really much of a concern here about holding on to the seat. And then, in fact, Tim Ryan went on the air after the primary, and we now have a number of polls. I mean, they're early polls and all of that, but they show him competitive. And this does become a prime opportunity now for Democrats to, in fact, pick up a seat, and therefore, in fact, the money will start flowing. And so I think in that sense, the first round of the campaign was won by Ryan.
Yeah. I think to Herb's point, I think Vance has an easier argument to make. I think saying that Democrats are doing badly is pretty easy when inflation's at a 40-year high. Making it about somebody's character like Ryan's trying to do, that's just a more nuanced argument. So and plus, Ohio leans right these days.
Oh yeah, no, we'd still say that somehow Vance would be the favorite. But right now, I mean, I think Vance actually has a number of things that he's saying, and he keeps on making unforced errors. He keeps on actually going to the right on abortion. Okay, maybe that's the way you're going to win in the general election. I'm not sure about that. Yeah. The careless comments he's made about Ukraine. I mean, that's just an unforgivable mistake.
He's still a relatively He's a rookie. I mean, he's never really run for office before. So these are the mistakes that young candidates make, or early candidates make.
Yeah.
Our last topic. Within the next few weeks or so, Ohio school kids return to their classrooms, and in some of those schools, teachers and other employees could be carrying guns. Lawmakers this summer made it easier for teachers to arm themselves. They only need 24 hours of training. This week, Governor DeWine defended the lower armed teacher training threshold and touted his administration's awarding of tens of millions of dollars in grants to nearly 1,200 school districts around the state to pay for security upgrades and safety training.
I use the word layering. We're trying to layer this in and give every school the tools that they need. Ultimately, that school is going to have to ensure the safety of the child. They're going to have to do the best they can. My job is to give them the best I can to help them do that.
Mike Miller, what do you think of this safety plan? Of course, this all came after the terrible shooting in Texas. Money for security and training, but also armed teachers.
Mike, I don't know. The school boards, they have an opportunity to turn it down. They don't have to do this if they don't want to, which I think is the one good thing. Is it going to save anything? It's these people that do these acts are so crazy, and I just saw the FBI close their investigation in the Dayton massacre and said nobody knew about it, nothing on social media, no indication from anybody that this would happen. And so many of them are just like that. If my children are in school, do I want a teacher there who's armed? I think I do. Other people will say no, they don't want, and I think that's a reasonable interpretation. This is not a panacea. What a lot of people, including me, think should happen is a lot of these guns should be banned, but the Republicans aren't going to do that. They make it easier to have weapons. But it's just a terrible, terrible problem, and there is no answer to it, but I don't think this hurts.
For the reporters at the table, I mean, it didn't seem like Mike DeWine is a huge fan of arming teachers either. He wanted, he stressed that the school boards make the rules. He's not going to allow for any less than 24 hours in training. And he really stressed that schools should hire trained police officers to be school resource officers. That's his preference. But he still signed the bill.
Yeah, I think he would rather talk about all the tens of millions of dollars they're going to spend training teachers and upgrading security than he would rather talk about the controversy of whether or not teachers should be carrying guns in schools. I know that I think it is optional, and so I think that you're more likely to see rural school districts do this. I think culturally that makes more sense there. But this certainly, in terms of people who are potentially swing voters in suburban areas, I just don't think that this would not go over that well. So politically, it's just there's not a lot for him to gain with it.
Jesse Balmer?
Yeah, I mean, this is the second kind of controversial gun bill that he signed, the other one being removing permit and training requirements for concealed carry, something that he made promises during his first campaign to do. So in some regards, he's making his promises for the people who said, do something in Dayton. He's breaking some promises. So, is this going to be a winning issue for him in November? We'll find out.
Herb, there was an article on the front page of the New York Times on last Sunday. They profiled a kindergarten teacher in Ohio named Mandy. They didn't give her last name, didn't say what district she teaches in. She's a kindergarten teacher. She's going to carry a gun. She was going through training, and she said that she has to teach her kids to hug her on the left side because she has her gun on the right side. Now, she's in a rural school district, and she argues she's far away from sheriffs for getting there. What's the right call there?
I think let the local district decide, and if they think it's the right call. But the first time there's an accidental shooting, then people will say, oh my goodness, we shouldn't have done that, that we went too far. I'd be curious to find out, as we're giving tens of millions of dollars out, where did this money come from? And if you notice, throughout this past year, the state of Ohio and the governor have been announcing lots of grants for this and that. And that money is largely coming from the federal government, which wound up, putting too much money out into the economy to fight the recession and all that, or unemployment. And now the people who really, complain about the federal debt are just making wonderful political points, spending this money that we don't really have.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Mike Miller, you're up first.
Well, I think the next 9 or so days are going to be really interesting in the U.S. Senate race. I disagree a little bit with what Herb said, and that I am not positive that Ryan's going to come out and attack Vance. I think what he has done so far is try to get the middle people, not the far right, not the far left. And I think what he's done so far has been very impressive. And I would be not surprised at all if he continues that throughout the remaining 90 days.
All right, Herb.
Three people who really deserve mention for their contributions to American politics: Liz Cheney, Maureen O'Connor, and Nancy Pelosi, who's probably been the best Speaker of the U.S. House in modern times.
Andrew.
So mine's not very serious, but I went to the state fairgrounds twice this week to talk to political candidates. I'm disappointed I did not get a chance to eat the develed egg with meringue on top. I'm sure that would have been an experience, but I did get to see the hog races today briefly.
Whoa, there we go. Who won? Never mind. Jesse.
In the most important news in Cincinnati, the zoo has welcomed a new hippo, so you can learn all about that.
New hippos. Is it a newborn or is it a...
Yeah, Fiona's sibling.
Nice. Well, there you go. There's positive. The Columbus Teachers Union voted to take the first step towards a possible strike with the start of school set for August 24th. The school board taking a hard line. Teachers in the Columbus City schools who have dealt with at-home learning, delayed starts because of the pandemic, they are not happy, and I think this thing will get settled because they don't want to deal with all those parents, both sides. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. And you can watch every episode on demand at our website, wosu.org, and on the PBS video app. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.